My name is Joe Prim, and I am the host of Prepare.Defend.Lead. In this episode, we will be talking preparedness once again. I'm going to share my story of how I got started in preparedness, and we will talk about the 6 main areas of preparedness and how to keep it simple. If that sounds interesting to you, along with some updates on the homestead and the budget Overland Project, stay tuned, and I'll catch up with you on the other side of the intro.
The comfort and distractions of today collide to indulge our desires and provide a slow death by apathy. A superior primitive ethos exists. Prepare for tomorrow. Defend what you value and lead those you love. This mindset is the foundation of living an authentic life as a bold, disciplined man resolute in your mission. Prepare, defend, lead. Your mission. Own it.
All right, here we go with yet another episode of PDL. If I'm not pumped up for this podcast and ready to go by the time that intro gets finished up, I am ready to rock and roll. So let's knock this one out of the park and get started with some updates. First off, the book that I have been talking about, I know it seems like forever and ever. It is just about done. I am going to hand it off very soon to somebody to edit and go through and fix all my silly grammatical errors and make sure that what I typed out actually is coherent. So I have a few things to go back through. At the end of each chapter, I'm going to have 3 action steps to kind of move you forward, help you get motivated and help you to move forward in the process of being open. And so I need to double check each of those, make sure each chapter has those, that those were filled in. I love quotes, so each chapter is going to have some quotes. I think I have most of those sorted out, but I want to make sure that those are organized and that I got the quotes that I want along with each chapter. I got one little segment, something that I just kind of learned about recently, something that's been in my mind. I've been thinking about speaking, and that's in the Open Your Mouth chapter. So I want to add just a little bit something more, but I promise that the day of the release of this book, and I know a lot of you that listen to this podcast signed up at the end of last year so that you will get a PDF copy of the book as soon as it's released, and I'm really excited about getting this done, not only because I think that it has the potential to help people, to give them a framework and some guideposts as they try to move forward in their life, but also, to be honest with you, it is a tremendous goal. Doing this book and thinking about this book over probably the last 5 years, and this book is really the reason all of this started. PDL, Ever Vigilant, this podcast, all that has happened to me over the last 5 years-ish. I'll have to go back at some point and get an exact date on that. But really, during some quiet time in the morning of prayer and meditation and thinking about things, this idea, this concept of being open, to being open in your mind, being open in your eyes, being open in your ears, opening your mouth, opening your heart, and opening your arms came to me. And over the years, it has, over those first maybe weeks, maybe months of thinking about this idea, this concept, as it formed in my mind and continued to grow into something different. And as it grew, the idea of getting this out there to other people, because it was helping me. It was helping me to understand what I needed to do in some different directions and some changes that I needed to make in my life. as I say on the cover of the book and as I say throughout the book, these are easy. They're 6 easy principles to understand and to implement into your life. But they are very difficult to master. Maybe impossible to master. I don't know. I'm still working on it. But originally, I wanted to get this idea out there, this concept of these 6 principles of open. I really wanted to get them out to people. And the initial thought that popped in my head is, hey, you could write a book. Why don't you write a book? And I didn't feel at that time that that's something that I could do. Didn't think that I had the capabilities, the ability to put down those thoughts onto paper and be able to convey the message that way. So the next idea that popped in my head was a podcast. I said, you know what? I can do that. I can do a podcast. That would be cool. I could do 8 episodes, an intro episode. I could do an episode on each of the open concepts, and then a review episode, and be done. And I will feel like I got this message out there to people. I will feel like I did as much as I possibly could. And this burden that's sitting on my shoulders here of sharing this with people will be gone forever. So, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to figure this out. So I started investigating a little bit, trying to figure out how to do a podcast. And now, 5 years later, I think my stats on podcasts on between this and Ever Vigilant have never been great. But when you see the numbers compiled over the years of well over 30,000 downloads of podcasts, and I don't know how many, probably 50 or 60 interviews that I did on Ever Vigilant. And with Ever Vigilant, I also did the Guerrilla Traffic podcast, which was a podcast that I would do midweek, just kind of unedited, unscripted, and unfiltered as I was on my commute home. So nobody, especially myself, at that moment where that thought came to my mind of writing a book, no one would have foresaw the journey of building this podcast and trying to build something off of this podcast, off of this idea, which led into homesteading, which led into so many different other areas and different things in not only my life, but the life of my family. So to, after all this time, finally come to a place where I was like, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do what I can to make a book and get this out there, not only just in the podcast form, and not only telling people, but also a print version. And so for me to be this close to foreseeing, to making something like this happen is tremendous. And for those of you out there who have had ideas, something that you wanted to do for a long period of time, and it gets put off, or you have kids, or you lose your job, and there's always things in our life that prevent us, or we can allow to prevent us from moving forward in some of these things that we feel like we should do. Different people we feel like we should help, whether it's financially or physically. Different books maybe that you should read, or a class that you should take, or, as we're going to talk about in this episode, starting to get into preparedness, or maybe it's a new hobby that you've always wanted to learn. Or maybe it's spending time with your father or mother that you have a rough relationship with, but you know they're getting up there in age. All of us have these different thoughts in the back of our mind that maybe don't keep us up at night, but keep coming back. Maybe a week goes by and that thought comes back. Maybe a couple days go by and that thought comes back. You see a TV commercial that reminds you of that thing. Pursue that thing, whatever it is. It's those thoughts, that idea is probably there for a reason. And it was the same with this book. I'm going to pursue it. I'm going to push it through to the end here. My goal at the beginning of this year was to have this thing wrapped up by the first quarter of this year, to have actual PDF versions of the book available by the first quarter of 2021, and if not at that same time, very shortly be able to follow up with the Kindle version and a physical copy version of this book. Of course, this book is much shorter. Being who I am, it's much shorter than I thought it would be. Sometimes I feel like that third grader who wrote up 15, 30 pages in his notebook on a book report or a report for school and went to type it up and ended up being one page. But the reality is, there will be no fluff in this book. This book has stories of me, has stories of my family, has stories that are relatable, and then it brings you in, explains the concept, explains that idea of why it's important, of what it is, why it's important, how to implement it into your life, and what can happen if you do implement these into your life. And then from there, we have some action points. So I wanted to keep it short. I wanted to keep it sweet. I wanted to keep it so that you can read through this book and learn something and move forward. So I'm excited about that. Looking forward to seeing this become a reality. I'm excited about it. The Overland Project, a real quick update on that. You know, I'm ironing out exact details on this, and as I finish up the writing on this book, I'm going to write up, report or a blog post or whatever you want to call it, but just an idea to get down my thoughts and my goal with this project written down for everybody to see and to understand what the goal is. Basically, at this point, the goal is to have a vehicle that can comfortably haul my family and our dog and everything that we would need in order to survive for 7 days. Whether that would be a camping or whether that would be getting out of where we live for an emergency situation to relocate. Whatever the case would be, that you would be able to have the supplies and have the family fit in the vehicle, but also have it be capable of going off-road. So the first part of the plan, phase 1, is obviously to catch up on the maintenance. When I purchased the vehicle, I had very little, if any, maintenance records. So right now, I've been doing a lot of investigating into the Mitsubishi Montero, the third generation of the Montero, the last Mitsubishi Montero that was sold in the United States. Been doing a lot of investigating into the vehicle, where its weak points are, where its strengths are, and really digging deep into where I can find suppliers for different parts and different pieces, what I need, where I want to put my main focus as far as maintenance. So phase number 1 is really going to be a push for maintenance. Plugs, wires, coils. There are some particularly goofy things on the intake that cause concern on the Montero that I want to make sure I get taken care of correctly with the butterfly valves. And over time, the bushings wear out on this intake, and what can happen is these little valves or the screws from these little butterfly valves can fall into your engine. Obviously, your engine's ruined, all because of a screw and a wore-out bushing. So when I pull it apart for the spark plugs, I'll take a look at that. The other concern always on pretty much any vehicle really is the water pump and the timing belt. So these are kind of the bigger maintenance things. The suspension seems okay for the time being. The bushings seem pretty good. So all these little things, I've been spending time inspecting the vehicle, spending time under the hood, spending time under the vehicle, spending time looking for suppliers, spending time watching videos, just trying to get a real understanding again of how the four-wheel drive system works in the vehicle, and getting this to a position to where we can start to add the fun stuff, where we can start to put the lift on and some bigger tires and some rock sliders and some protection underneath for the transmission and the engine. And I want to lay all that out in a report, what the different phases will be, because the real goal of this is on top of the capabilities to go off-road, to take the family and our equipment and food for 7 days with us. The other part of it is to show that this can be done for under $10,000. Now, if you start looking around at overlanding on YouTube or on the websites, you're going to quickly see that this is a very expensive niche to get into. Much like anything else, right? Hunting or fishing. There's a segment that is big money. I want to prove with this build that for under $10,000, you can have a capable vehicle. Is it going to be as capable or as sexy as a lot of what you're seeing? Probably not. But it's clean. It will be capable. It's a strong vehicle. And by the time we finish up with it, and being that the vehicle cost around $6,000, that means we got about $4,000 to play around with for getting the maintenance up to where we want it, getting new tires, and the other priorities that I had mentioned in a podcast a while back. And again, I'll probably play around with that as we move forward and try to work out an exact budget on this. But this is my goal. That's what this project's about. Something that I would like to bring some of the rest of you guys in on. If this is something you're interested in and want to learn and want to work together on, if some of you guys are down here in Texas and you want to take a trip down to Padre Island or to Big Bend or someplace else that you know about it's a cool spot with some good trails. Texas is a little bit different than a lot of states. There's very, very, very little public land in Texas. So there are very few places other than some parks and some, a lot of dirt roads around to go off-roading or overlanding in. So if this is something that you're interested in, if this is something that you do, if this is something that you like to do on your weekends is go camping, hey, let's get together. Let's get a group of people that are from down here in Texas, or some people that want to come down here to Texas and do a little off-roading, do a little camping, spend some time together. Let's see if we can get some people together to learn from one another, to grow with one another, to test one another out, but to also support one another in this endeavor to build out some vehicles in a way that we can show others what is possible and what we are capable of building, and at the same time keep it practical, right? For our families, for what we need to do, what we envision is our goals there. So that's kind of some thoughts on that. As far as the homestead, still moving forward there. We were out to visit the property this last weekend. Step by step, little step by little step, it seems like at times, as we grow impatient in our desire to get to our real home. Seeing the outside finished and the roof on and the HVAC, all the ducts are in, and the electric is now all in, waiting for the plumbing, and then we can start doing some drywall and insulating the place and getting it ready to become our home. We're getting close. And sometimes the closer you get, the less patient you are. So at this point, where we're sitting on our property, the area where we're at, we have 5 acres, but there's nobody in the lots next to us. So we have a massive area. It's absolutely beautiful. I know a lot of ranches down here got hit very hard with death of their exotic livestock when we had that freeze here in Texas a few weeks ago. We were just out there this last weekend, and there's still some black buck and axis deer. So the majority of the animals, hopefully, that are out on this development survived. I know that from what we heard, there were a few that died, but hopefully looks like the majority of the animals out there made it through that hard freeze. And that's one of the things we're most excited about seeing out there, is watching the wildlife and that being a part of what we have going on there at the homestead. So as we move forward with that and get closer to moving in, it's another thing that we're excited about as we move forward and these things come to completion. You never know what's next, right? I can tell you this, there will always be something next for me and my family. There will always be a push forward as we challenge ourselves and find something new, find a new challenge, find a new way, find something different. So as we move forward and we get closer to that date, definitely want to have a party of sorts, a PDL party out there on the property to get to know some of you guys that listen to this podcast regularly and share with you guys in our joy and our excitement of moving into this new place. So I'll of course, as we get closer to that date, we don't even have any idea when that will be at this point, but I do want to share in that joy and that excitement with those who have been following along and showing interest and want to see what comes next for us as we move forward and start to populate that property with fruit trees and bushes and gardens and livestock and start to create and build out of a blank slate, a blank piece of land to build something off of it that will not only provide for us, but provide for the other animals that live in that area, maybe provide for neighbors, provide for us in different ways. So we're really excited about it. So let's get into the real topic of this episode. So for me, the whole adventure of getting into preparedness, the whole thing started probably at that same time, around 5-ish years ago. And for me, at that time, I had heard of preparedness. I kind of had a vague idea of what prepping or preppers or that sort of thing was, but didn't really ever feel like it was needed, right? Didn't really feel like that was my responsibility, wasn't something I was really that concerned about. You know, you live in the suburbs and things kind of have always gone my way, and despite having spent time living in Central America, once you kind of get sucked into that life where everything is fine and you don't need to worry about things and you get content with that, you forget what the real world is like. So as I was probably listening to podcasts and maybe even reading some books, and preparedness was coming up, right? Because if you get into any sort of self-help or personal growth or any place where you're trying to challenge yourself and push yourself outside of your comfort zone, a big part of that is preparedness, right? If you got an exam or test, or you're taking some courses because you're trying to develop some different ideas or become better at something, all of a sudden now you are preparing for tests, or you're preparing for exams, or you're preparing for job interviews, or you're preparing for meetings, or maybe you're preparing for a speech, or you're preparing for a podcast, right? The more you push yourself to develop yourself, the outside of your comfort zone of just hanging around, chilling out, talking with your friends, or playing video games, or watching football, the more you get outside of your comfort zone, the more you realize how important preparedness is in everything, in everyday activities, right? So once you start going down that path, you start to realize that, man, I am preparing for everything. Before I make a phone call, I've run through the conversation vaguely in my mind of what I want to say on that phone call so I don't forget anything. That's preparing. I need to confront somebody about this or about that. Well, I've already run through that conversation in my mind. I have a pretty good idea of the message that I want to get across. Okay, I've prepared. So somewhere down this path of learning about prepping and preparedness and starting to realize how important preparing is, And not only realizing how important preparing is and preparedness is, but also realizing how important it is to take responsibility for myself was another key part of this, right? You start to realize when you get into personal growth or personal development or just starting to take some initiative down that path, you start to realize that this is all on me. This is my responsibility. This is my mission. I must own it. So all of these different things start accumulating, right? And they start rattling around in the back of my head. And somehow, some way, I came across this photo. And it might have been on a news website. I have no idea where I saw it. I think I still have it on one of my phones or on some SD card somewhere. I will try to look that up and find it because even today I think it would be a good reminder to me. But I saw this photo and I remember looking at this photo sometimes 3, 4, 5 times a day because it resonated so strongly with me. That when I was having a hard time struggling through a day at work because I was bored or didn't want to be there or was frustrated with something, I would look at this picture and it would center me and put my focus back on what the true mission was. And in this picture was this father holding the hand of his daughter as they walked down a war-torn road in Syria or some other Middle Eastern country. And all around them, the buildings are bombed out. The roads are filled with rubble and debris. And this father is walking down this road holding the hand of his daughter. And as I looked at this picture, I realized that this man was no different than me holding the hand of my daughter. My daughter was roughly the same age as this girl. And thinking, look at where this guy is. He wants the same things for his daughter that I want for my daughter. Food, water, shelter, protection, health. He wants all of those things for his daughter that I want for my daughter. And look at the devastation that's surrounding him. Look how difficult it must be for him to look at his daughter every day and not be able to provide those things that she needs. And that all those things together in that picture was the cherry on top to scare me enough, to help me realize my responsibility enough to make me start down a path of preparedness. Now, when you start down that path, it's rough, as I talked about in the last episode. When you are filled with fear, and fear is what's motivating you to get into preparedness, as I've talked about in many podcasts, fear puts you in a place of making very bad decisions and being very easily manipulated. So what happens, we get fearful, we start watching YouTube videos or going to this website or that website, and because we're so filled with fear, we are very susceptible to advertising, or we're very susceptible to one person's opinion versus another person's opinion, right? So that fear leads to making rather foolish decisions. So I want to break this down into a very simple idea, and then we'll build it out from there. So for me and for my family, the homestead is as much a part of our preparedness as having some food in storage. For me, as I'm moving forward and starting to understand and get a better grasp on the capabilities of the Overland Project, that also is a part of preparedness for us. But your backpack, your go bag, what you have in your pocket, your jacket pocket, those things as well all become a part of your preparedness. So I mentioned in the last episode, and I'm going to go back to them again here, we got 5 main areas, and then since we live in a modern first world country, we'll throw in a bonus one. But really, these 5 areas are food, water, shelter, first aid / health, protection, and since, like I said, since we live in a first world country here and it's become so important to us, communication. So when we're beginning out here and we break down into these 6 very simple categories, and we can start to build on them. And again, as I mentioned in the last episode, we can build slowly if we just focus on these 6 areas. And what happens is you build out from yourself, build out from what you carry on your person, to your home, to what's in your backpack that you carry each day, to what's in maybe a go bag that you keep in your vehicle just in case you had to leave your vehicle, to what you keep in your vehicle, to what you have on your homestead. You build out bigger concentric circles of what preparedness is. But all of the different things really fall back into these 6 categories. So when we had this storm a couple weeks ago down here in Texas, one of the first things to sell out in the stores was milk and eggs. And my wife came home from the grocery store and had scrounged around and picked up a few things for us. And her comment was, boy, if we had some chickens, as we did before, and we had some goats like we did before, we would have the milk and eggs that I wasn't able to find at the grocery store. Again, falls into the food category. So those are the main categories of things that we need, right? So I'm going to break down a few different areas in your life with your home, what you carry on your person. I like to have a go bag in my vehicle, and I also have just a sling bag. It's kind of my EDC bag. And then I have my vehicle. And then for us, not at the moment, but we're building into having the homestead. I want to just kind of briefly go over how each of these categories goes back to the simplified, very simple idea of food, water, shelter, first aid, health, protection, and communication. So let's start with our home. Just because we all have a place where we live, some people might not even have a vehicle that are listening to this podcast. They might go to work each day by walking or by riding a bike. So let's start in our home. We want to begin to store up some food. Many people like to just purchase things that they purchase regularly and just start to stock up on extra things. It's not a bad way to do things, to get a couple weeks worth of food, but eventually you're going to want to go into some longer term storage, food storage. There are different ways to do that, different ideas behind doing that, different, whether you get like a military style MRE type food, or you can get dehydrated food, or you can store your own food, get your own Mylar bags and fill them with beans or rice and store things that way. Water, most of us have fresh, drinkable tap water. You can start to fill up juice bottles with water. You can buy plastic water containers at the store that you can fill up right from your tap. Or You can start to buy up cases of water from Walmart or wherever you might do your regular grocery shopping, whatever's convenient for you. A lot of times you can find a 24 bottle case for $3 at the store on sale. Start to stock up little by little so you have some water. The good thing about those water bottles is they can be refilled. You can find water filtration systems that will attach right to a water bottle and you can drink right through the straw. I talked about one in an episode not that long ago that I really like, a very small water filter. For me, as you'll see here, I want to be redundant. And I want to give myself options. Because whether you have the stuff in your home or you have it in your vehicle, if your vehicle is at home because you're at home, you have that extra redundancy. If your vehicle is at home, probably your backpack or your go bag is at home, right? So you have those things to be redundant. And of course, the further away you get to maybe being by yourself, walking someplace because your vehicle broke down, the less redundancy you have because you're limited by what you can carry. So, and then we have first aid and health. And the reason I throw health in there is because keep in mind, as you're building off of this, keep in mind what are your needs versus maybe anybody else's. Some of you may always need to keep an EpiPen with you. Some of you, like me, might be well off to carry contact solution and an extra set of contacts with you. Some of you may get migraines and there might be a special medicine that you either need that's prescribed or a caffeine pill that helps get rid of your migraines. And if you are in a situation with a lot of stress, sometimes it brings those things on. Some of you have allergies and might be well in your best interest to make sure you have some extra allergy medicine in there. And the reason also that I say health is because what about toothbrushes? What about toothpaste? What about soap, shampoo, some hand sanitizer? You know, a lot of us were concerned about toilet paper in the last year. But it wasn't just toilet paper that places were out of. Even something simple like hand sanitizer, bleach, things like that were very hard to come by as well. So in the past, growing up, I only ever remember seeing empty grocery shelves after a hurricane or a tornado or something like that. We've been seeing it more and more regularly. So when we see these different things that would be helpful or wise to have around that are relatively cheap, like bleach or contact solution, now is the time to purchase these things so that we have them. And then communication. And for me, a big part of communication has just become our phones, right? We have our cell phones. It helps give us directions. We can take pictures. We can communicate with email. We can get news alerts. We can call people, right? Isn't that funny that the last thing that I mentioned about having your phone with you is that you can call people? There's so many things that we can do from that piece of equipment. But what is it that we need? We need to have that charged up. So one thing that really came in handy for us this last storm with electric out was having the battery packs for our cell phones to be able to make sure that we kept our cell phones charged so that if there was an emergency and somebody needed to get a hold of us, we would know our phones were charged. So normally I keep that in my EDC bag. I always want to keep that with me just in case my cell phone goes dead and I happen to be on the drive home, or I happen to be in the middle of a meeting and my cell phone goes dead. I can pull the little battery pack out, plug in my phone, and I'm good to go. So some of these things in my EDC bag, I really just keep the things that are handy for work. But what is that? Well, that's something to snack on. A lot of times I do have a bottle of water with me. I got pens. I got a knife. Just basic, simple face mask, gloves. I have in my bag, I got a flashlight in that EDC bag, just that little sling bag, and I got a Leatherman in there. Very simple, very lightweight bag filled with most things that I need for work, just extra redundant things that I might need for work, but also a little bit of extra, right? Having the Leatherman in there, having a good flashlight in there, some extra batteries, that type of thing. Again, really hits back to a little bit of the basics, right? That we might have on our list. But then from there, we go to the backpack that I usually keep in my vehicle. The idea behind having the backpack in my vehicle is that if my vehicle breaks down and I got to run for gas, I got some equipment with me in my backpack. If my vehicle broke down, I'm redundant in the stuff that I have in my vehicle and the stuff that I have in my backpack. So that backpack, again, usually has a knife, a water filter, something, a water bladder. And I'm just going off the top of my head here because I want you to build your bag for what works for you. But again, we're going back to these same basics. It's going to have something for food. It's going to have something for water. It's going to have something for shelter, which really I categorize as a way to stay dry or a way to stay warm, right? So in that bag, I'll have something for starting a fire and a Mylar blanket, a poncho, something like that to keep me dry, to keep me warm. First aid, I have a very comprehensive first aid kit in that bag. Health, again, I have a set of contacts and contact solution. And again, with the first aid kit, got aspirin and just some of the simple basic stuff, as well as having a tourniquet and stuff. For protection, I almost will always have a knife with me. And then I'll have a tactical pen, which is really just a pen in a very hardened case that you could use for blunt force. And then a lot of times I'll have my firearm with me in my EDC bag or in my truck bag. And then communication. Again, we go back to having the battery pack, but then we also can have different forms of communication in your vehicle. Maybe you have a CB or a ham radio. Maybe you just have some walkie-talkies, just some cheaper style walkie-talkies so that you can converse back and forth with somebody maybe in a trail vehicle, or maybe if somebody's going to stay in the vehicle and you're going to go for a walk to go get some gasoline or to look for something, that you have a way to communicate should somebody get turned around and lost. And then in your vehicle, you're going to do the same thing. So as you see, no matter if we're talking about our everyday carry on our person, whether we're talking about a bag or a briefcase or a backpack that we always have with us, whether we're talking about a bag in the vehicle that we have some extra goodies in, or whether we're talking about our vehicle itself, or whether we're talking about as you move out from there to your homestead or your home, you go back to these same 6 categories. And that's why I want to keep this as simple as possible. So on your homestead, it's going to go back to the same thing, right? You're going for food. You want to be able to set up your homestead or even your yard, your backyard. A good friend of mine, Joseph Cartwright, loved the idea of having a homestead. And although at some point they really want to have a decent piece of property to really grow their imagination and grow what they're doing and what they love, they've converted their backyard into an awesome little urban homestead. And it's absolutely beautiful. They have chickens and lots of different types of plants growing, different types of gardens, and different types of things that they're experimenting with to see what will grow well in their area, what grows well in the shade, what's growing well in the sun, and they're experimenting. And it's awesome to see the joy of somebody who is in an urban area walk out into their backyard, or I should say suburban area, walk out into their backyard and show you what they're doing and how happy they are and how excited they are and what they're learning and what they're trying. It is one of the most beautiful things you will ever see in your life, is somebody doing something that they love and that they are receiving joy from doing. So just because I'm talking about homestead and we're going to be moving into 5 acres doesn't mean that you can't do a lot of that where you are at. But on the other hand, I will say this. There are far too many of you guys that are dreaming about having a homestead that should be moving forward with something. There are far too many people that have been looking for a piece of property for 5 years or 6 years. If we can do it, if I can do it, if we can be rolling into our second chance, our second time of doing this, I think it's something that pretty much anybody can do. Are there sacrifices that must be made? Are there pluses and minuses in different things that changes of a way of life that you're going to have to make? Yes. But are there benefits? Yes. Are there modern negatives to it? Sure. But from my experience, from our time having a piece of property, and even though there's a lot of work involved, the joy, the responsibilities, the growth are unparalleled to any times that I have lived in other types of places. To the point where each day when I would come home from work and I would have a 2-hour commute in the morning and usually at least a 3-hour commute home in the evening, by the time I would get home from work, of course, it would be pitch black in the winter and it would be cold outside. The wind would be blowing, the snow would be whipping up. And what was my first responsibility when I would get home each evening? First, to take care of the animals. If it was real cold, the kids would stay inside. If it wasn't, the kids would come outside. We'd make sure that everything was fed, make sure that the coop was sealed up tight, keep them hungry foxes out of there. And we would take care of these animals, so we had a responsibility. And then after that, kids would go inside, they'd tuck themselves in, they'd peel off their wet and snowy clothes, and I would go back out and I would bring in armload after armload after armload of firewood into our home. Tromping through the snow up to my knees as I would make my way in, load after load after load, to make sure that we had enough firewood to not only get us through the night, but that my wife and kids had enough firewood to get them through the next day while I was gone at work. And as much work and as incomprehensible as that is, that amount of effort at that time, at that inconvenience is to those of us who just love to flip that thermostat up a few notches, the amount of joy that I received from filling up the house with firewood is really something that I'm not fully able to express because I don't fully comprehend it. And I had been doing it for months until one evening I realized how much joy it brought me to load up and get that wood burner going, keep that wood burner going through the night and through the next day. There's a pride to doing these types of things. There's a pride to taking care of your family. There's a pride to these things that I call a blessing. To me, I see them as a blessing. But when you don't have them, when you flip the thermostat up, when so many of these things that we don't even think about anymore, when we don't grow our own food, all these little things that have been taken away from us, I kind of believe to be honest with you, that we've lost out on much of the joy and much of the blessings of life because we are so detached from the reality, from what we like to look at now as just work or things that would be a waste of time, because we would be so much better off spending our time watching another cat video on YouTube. So these are the things that I thought about, or that I didn't understand whatsoever before we had made the commitment to go out to the old homestead. But watching my kids grow up, spending their time there, growing up, getting muddy, playing in the creek, climbing trees, fighting goats, chasing chickens, having responsibility, seeing things born, having puppies born, and watching that happen, watching that Great Pyrenees mommy dog take care of those puppies was an amazing experience. But then on the other end, you also experience death, and you also experience the sacrifice of taking life so that we had food to eat. We had the experience of the disappointments of growing gardens and things failing, and then trying again the next year and trying to get some things to work, and seeing some things succeed and some things fail, and trying to get a better grasp on where we could see success and negating the things that brought us failure. Sorry, I kind of went down a rabbit trail here as I reminisce about the homestead, but I saw that same type of joy and that same type of understanding in Joseph there in his suburban homestead backyard. So you can recreate that even if you don't have that opportunity. But for many of you, I would urge you to be a little bit more urgent and a little bit more pushing towards the homestead. If that's something that you think you want to do, if that's a direction that you think you want to go in, be willing to take that step. There's a lot there, a lot more probably to unpack, be a little bit different for everybody, but it was an amazing experience for our family, and amazing enough that everybody wanted to do it again once we got down here to Texas. So, as always, I am always, my intent with this podcast, with PDL, with everything that I try to talk about here, is really to simplify things. To take away the fear, to take away the confusion, to take away people getting taken advantage of because they're in a state of fear and aren't sure what they need to do to move forward in preparedness. So if you focus again on these 6 main groups, try to keep them as even as possible. If you know you've stocked up on food, how do you look on water? You know you look good on food and water. How do we look on blankets? Do we got enough blankets to make sure that if a snowstorm or blizzard comes through or the electric gets turned off that we can stay warm? How do you look in communication? Do you have some redundancy in your communication? Do you have some different options? How are batteries? Do you have a way to recharge batteries if the power goes off? Do you have batteries for your flashlights? Sometimes lights can fall into the protection. Sometimes firearms can fall into food if you could use the rifle for hunting and for protection. What I'm going to caution you on is going too far down the rabbit trail in any one of these areas. You know, one of the coolest things about preparedness and prepping is people love the firearms part of it. And you can go so far down that road that you forget about the other aspects. Caution yourself, hold yourself back, try to keep all of these areas equal in where they're at so that you can move forward in a good direction. And for those that maybe feel like, man, this is something I need to do. I've got to make sure that I'm taking care of my wife and kids. This is my responsibility. I'm going to do this. And your wife's in charge of the budget, or your wife says, nope, I don't think so. I don't see why this is relevant. Write out a plan. Spend some time focusing on a small plan, how you could start this out. These are our 6 areas. We're going to build things slowly from here. Explain why. Don't be afraid to sell the idea. Don't be afraid to explain why you feel this is important and what sacrifices that you are willing to make in order to make this happen. Maybe you're the one that needs to not go golfing as often in order to make her feel comfortable with the budget to move forward with this. Maybe it's you who needs to not go out every weekend or every couple weekends, or maybe you're going to have to miss one of your vacations in order to start to move forward with this. Whatever it is, prove by selling the idea and by being willing to make the sacrifices yourself in order to make this happen. So I think that's it. I think I've covered everything that I wanted to cover about preparedness, my theories, my ideas behind preparedness, what I really think after over 5 years of preparing and prepping and doing all and going down the rabbit trails and making bad purchases and misunderstanding and being fearful about things. These are the things I have learned, and I want to share them with you guys so that those that are starting out don't go down a bad path, and that those that have been preparing or into preparedness for a long time, that you also can maybe simplify things and simplify the way that you look at things and the way you categorize things and move forward from that direction so that you aren't making mistakes and spending money on things that we don't need to spend money on. There's so many cool things out there in this niche that you could spend so much money. It's really ridiculous. So I really try to be careful even what I'm consuming and what I'm listening to and what I'm watching to make sure that I'm focusing on what is important to me, how I can be redundant in what I'm doing, and how I can best set myself and my family up to thrive during rough times versus just barely survive. So with all that out of the way, I hope you appreciate this episode. I hope that you got something out of it. If you did, I would really, really appreciate it if those that get something out of this episode, if you would go to iTunes or wherever you download this podcast and just leave a short review. And if you think it deserves it, give me 5 stars or what you think this podcast. Those reviews make a big difference between people just passing by this podcast and those that are going to listen to it. I know for myself, when I'm flipping through the podcast, unless it's been recommended by somebody, I'm going to go right to the reviews and see what somebody says before I download that episode and spend my time listening. So I appreciate you guys giving me your time to share my thoughts on preparedness. I would appreciate a review, subscribe, and share this with somebody else that you think that this could help them out, right? The more prepared your neighbors are, the more prepared your friends are, the more prepared your relatives are, the less likely they are to come knocking on your door when times get tough, right? And none of us want somebody that we love showing up empty-handed at our door when we're all going through a rough time. So I appreciate you guys listening again. Some of you guys have been listening for a long time. I want this thing to grow. I want this thing to move forward. I want to equip and teach and get men to come to the realization that going back to the fundamentals, going back to what we are here for, what our mission is, to prepare, defend, and lead. And then way we can move forward in a different direction. As always, hold fast and God bless.